"You really like performing, don't you, Jason?" she said, voice steady, eyes unshaken. The cafeteria went silent. Hundreds of students stared as the school's golden boy froze mid-smirk. "Too bad," she added softly. "The audience is changing." His laughter died. His friends shifted uncomfortably. And for the first time, the bully looked like the one being cornered. What Jason didn't know was that the girl he'd mocked, the one who refused to fight back, didn't need a famous name to destroy him. She had something far stronger. She had something that terrifies cowards. Within a week, every screen in Brookdale High would play his downfall. Not because of who she was, but because of what she chose to be. The king of the school was about to fall, because of the girl they should have never underestimated. The bus hissed to a stop like it was sighing with relief. Its brakes groaned, the doors yawned open, and humid Texas air rolled inside, thick, golden, restless. Lena Brooke stepped down onto the pavement, sneakers crunching on cracked asphalt still warm from the rising sun. The air smelled of gasoline and freshly cut grass, but all she felt was the weight of the promise she kept whispering to herself. No headlines, no attention, no more running. Brookdale High looked painfully ordinary. Red brick walls, white columns, a flag slapping lazily against the pole. Yet Lena knew better. Schools were never just buildings. They were arenas where reputations were currency and invisibility was survival. Her fingers tightened around the worn canvas backpack hanging from one shoulder. Inside it were a few notebooks, a faded sweatshirt, and a single envelope she never opened anymore. One that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume and old headlines. Isabel Hart, once the darling of Hollywood, then the scandal, the screaming tabloids, the photos that should never have been taken, the custody war that turned Lena into a headline, the crying daughter of Isabel Hart. That was years ago. But in Lena's world, the echo never stopped. She'd seen what fame did to people, how it turned neighbors into reporters, friends into informants. She'd watched her mother crumble under flashbulbs that felt like gunfire. So Lena had learned early attention was poison disguised as admiration. When Isabel reinvented herself as Isabel Brooks, moving to a quiet Houston suburb under her maiden name, Lena followed. A new identity, a public school experiment, a chance to live like everyone else. Her mother called it freedom. Lena called it camouflage. She drew a slow breath and stepped toward the front doors. The glass panes reflected a girl she barely recognized. Dark hair, cropped shorter now, dyed nearly black. No makeup, no sparkle, just plain. Deliberately plain. That was how you survived after the world had devoured your face. Inside, chaos ruled. Lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked. Perfume clashed with sweat and floor wax. Lena kept her head down, sliding through the noise like a shadow. Eyes turned, whispers rippled. New girl. Who is she? Where's she from? Every new school sounded the same. Every laugh carried the same potential cruelty. She counted tiles instead of faces, 1, 2, 3, until she could almost believe she was invisible. Almost. Then came the laughter. Low first, then louder, rolling through the hallway like thunder pretending to be music. Jason Cole. Even without looking, she knew. The kind of confidence that didn't have to announce itself. It radiated. Captain of the basketball team, social royalty. The boy everyone either followed or feared. He leaned against his locker, surrounded by disciples in matching jackets, spinning a basketball on one finger as if gravity obeyed him personally. He noticed her. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Enough. His grin sharpened, playful and cruel all at once. Target locked, her stomach twisted. Attention, again. The one thing she'd sworn off. The first attack came quick. She was crossing the hallway when a shoulder slammed into her, deliberate and heavy. Her binder hit the floor, papers scattered like startled doves. Laughter followed, crisp and controlled. "Careful, new girl," Jason said, his voice all honey and venom. Lena crouched, gathering her papers, knuckles whitening. Not here, she told herself. Not again. Jason's sneakers appeared in her peripheral vision. You gonna say thanks or you don't do manners where you're from? No response. Behind him, someone snorted. Cold shoulder, bro. Jason chuckled, enjoying the performance. Hey, I'm talking to you. She rose slowly, papers pressed to her chest, and met his eyes. Dark calm meeting bright arrogance. You should try watching where you're going sometime, she said evenly. The hallway froze. It wasn't volume that silenced them. It was composure. Her tone carried no fear, no plea, just quiet certainty, the kind forged from years of learning when not to flinch. Jason blinked. For a moment, the grin faltered, confusion flickering behind it. Then he laughed, loud, forced. Oh, you've got some fire. Lena stepped past him. Didn't look back. Didn't hurry. And that was the moment Jason Cole, king of Brookdale High, decided she'd just declared war. By lunchtime, the rumor mill was spinning. She talked back to Jason. No way. Swear on it. Lena sat alone at a corner table, unwrapping her sandwich with steady hands. She'd been here before, in new cafeterias surrounded by curious stares. But this one felt different. Because this time, she wasn't the frightened girl running from flashbulbs. She was a ghost learning how to live among the living again. Across the room, Jason watched her. Every calm bite she took was an insult he couldn't swallow. Every silence was defiance. He didn't know that the girl he was trying to break had already been broken by millions. After school, she waited by the bus stop, the Texas heat shimmering off the pavement. She saw Jason again by the parking lot, spinning his ball, laughing too loudly. He looked up and smirked. She didn't look away. For a heartbeat, pity touched her expression. He'd never understand the luxury of anonymity. He thought being seen was power. She knew being unseen was freedom. He had no idea what kind of monsters she'd already survived. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Their silence often hides a storm. The sky had turned velvet black by the time Lena got home. The house was small but elegant. Cream walls, a piano in the corner, curtains always drawn. Her mother sat by the window, glasses on, reading a script lit only by a soft lamp. The light made her face look both older and timeless. Lena dropped her backpack onto the floor with a sigh. They're all the same, she muttered. Every school, every face. Isabel looked up, removing her glasses. Rough day? Just people. Her mother smiled faintly. They'll get used to you. I don't want them to. Isabel set the script aside and crossed the room. Lena, hiding isn't living. Lena's eyes flashed. Living got us destroyed, remember? The silence between them stretched, thick with memory. The cameras outside their gate, the screaming reporters, the flashbulbs that left spots on her vision for weeks. Finally, Isabel exhaled. Then do this for you. Live quietly, yes, but live. Blend in, laugh, learn. And if someone tries to hurt you again... She paused, brushing a strand of hair from Lena's cheek. Don't hide. Just be still until the truth does the talking for you. Lena looked down at their joined hands. And if the truth doesn't help? Then roar, Isabel said softly. When the time comes, roar. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly somewhere over Houston, a sound that felt more like a warning than weather. Lena went to her room, stood before the mirror, and whispered to her reflection. No headlines, no attention, no more running. Then quieter. But maybe no more fear either. You can't erase your past, but you can decide who you'll be when it comes knocking again. If you were Lena, would you keep your secret to protect your peace, or let the world know who you truly are? Morning sunlight painted Brookdale High in gold and shadow, a beautiful disguise for the battlefield it really was. The air buzzed with gossip, whispers, and the kind of laughter that always came before cruelty. Lena stepped through the front doors, calm as ever, her expression unreadable. Her plain navy sweater clung to her shoulders like armor, her gaze fixed ahead. Inside, her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the footsteps echoing down the hall. She told herself it was just another day, a day to stay invisible, a day to survive. But Jason Cole wasn't done. He never was. The moment she entered the main corridor, she saw him, leaning against the row of lockers as if they belonged to him. His friends circled like satellites, laughing too loudly, trying too hard. Jason held a coffee cup in one hand, spinning it idly like a prop in a movie he thought he directed. His gaze tracked her across the hallway, cold and calculating. The crowd parted slightly when she approached, a ripple of expectation passing through them. The new girl. The quiet one. The girl who'd humiliated the king with nothing but composure. He smiled. Predators always did before the bite. It happened fast. She passed by him, and his shoulder collided with hers hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. The coffee cup tipped, its contents exploding across her shirt in a hot, sticky wave. The hallway gasped. Jason's friends burst into laughter, the cruel kind that filled the silence like applause at someone else's pain. Jason tilted his head, grin widening. "Seems you can't see," he said, voice dripping mock sympathy. "You really should watch where you're going." Lena stood still for a heartbeat, the heat of the spill burning through fabric, seeping into skin. Then she blinked once, slowly, letting the noise fade until it was just her breathing and the distant hum of the lights above. Calm. Always calm. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, folded, spotless, and dabbed at the stain without looking at him. The sound of laughter faltered as confusion rippled through the crowd. Jason leaned closer, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "No words this time?" Lena raised her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was cool enough to cut glass. "Funny. For someone who thinks he runs this place, you don't seem very good at staying on your feet." The hallway froze. Jason's grin stiffened. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His friends exchanged looks, uncertain, awkward, like spectators suddenly realizing the show wasn't going according to script. Lena folded the handkerchief neatly, slipped it back into her pocket, and met his gaze fully. There was no trembling, no apology, no anger. Just quiet certainty. "Next time," she said, her tone calm but edged with steel, "make sure it's actually an accident." And then she turned, walking away, steady, graceful, her shoulders straight despite the dark stains spreading across her shirt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. But every step she took sounded like defiance. Jason's laughter followed her, forced, brittle, a sound trying too hard to be confident. But deep down, he felt it, that tiny crack in control. Lena slipped into the girls' restroom, shutting the door behind her. The mirror caught her reflection, damp shirt, shaking hands. She pressed her palms against the sink and exhaled slowly. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Stay calm, sweetheart. When they try to break you, let them see you can't bend." She closed her eyes. "Not today," she whispered. Not again. Not for him. By the time she stepped back into the hallway, her face was composed once more, the storm tucked neatly beneath her silence. Jason watched her return to class as if nothing had happened, and something twisted in his chest. Not guilt, but disbelief. He'd seen girls cry, snap, plead, run. But this one? She did none of it. She was supposed to break. Instead, she'd made him look small. That kind of humiliation didn't fade. It festered. "Man, she's cold," one of his friends muttered. Jason didn't respond. He was staring at the faint coffee drops on the floor where she'd stood, his grin gone. Cold? No. He'd seen cold before. This was something else. Controlled, calculated, dangerous. It was the kind of calm that comes from people who've already survived worse than you can imagine. And that terrified him more than he'd ever admit. By the afternoon, rumors were spreading again. She told him off. She didn't even yell. Jason actually looked embarrassed. Lena ignored the whispers, sitting quietly through each class, taking notes like nothing had happened. But inside, she was replaying every moment, not to feel proud, but to steady herself. She hated the attention, hated the way eyes followed her now, not because of pity, but curiosity. The new girl who wasn't scared, the girl who could stand up to the king without losing her composure. It wasn't power she wanted, it was peace. But peace had a price, and people like Jason didn't let things go. After the final bell, she walked home, the Texas heat pressing against her skin like punishment. The sun was a molten coin in the sky, the kind of brightness that made the world feel unreal. She could still hear their laughter echoing in her head. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded her of another kind of noise. Camera shutters, shouting paparazzi, the way they used to chant her name outside her old home. Her stomach tightened. This was different, but the feeling was the same. Exposure. The same game, just a smaller stage. That night, she sat on her bed staring at the shirt she'd scrubbed clean. The faint stain lingered like a bruise. She wanted to throw it away, but didn't. She hung it on the back of her chair, a reminder. Her mother knocked softly before entering. "You okay?" Lena nodded. "Trouble at school?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." Isabel gave her a long look, eyes sharp with maternal intuition. "You sound like me when I was your age." Lena's lips quirked. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "Maybe not." Isabel sat beside her. "But it should remind you, you've got more strength than you think." Lena exhaled. "Sometimes it feels like strength is just pretending not to care." Her mother smiled faintly. "Then pretend long enough for it to become real." Lena lay awake for hours after her mother left, watching the moonlight crawl across the ceiling. She thought of Jason, of the way his grin cracked, of how the crowd had fallen silent. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was warning. He would come again. They always did. But she would be ready, because the truth was, she wasn't afraid of bullies anymore. She'd already faced the world when it tried to tear her apart. What could a spoiled high school boy possibly do that life hadn't already done worse? Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Not today. If you were in Lena's place, would you fight back or walk away and let silence be your victory? By Friday, the storm had shifted, not loud and violent, but quiet, creeping, and cruel. Jason Cole had a rule. No one defied him and walked away untouched. And Lena Brooks, the quiet new girl with the calm eyes and the unshakable voice, had done worse than defy him. She'd ignored him. So, his games began. It started small. A crooked heart drawn in permanent marker across her locker door, her name twisted into something obscene. Whispers followed her between classes, soft enough to hide behind laughter, sharp enough to draw blood. A fake note left on her desk that read, "We know who you really are." Each prank was designed to pull a reaction, a flinch, a glare, a shout. Anything that proved she was human enough to hurt. But Lena gave him nothing. Every Monday, she arrived at school a little earlier, wiped the graffiti clean, organized her books, and moved on. When someone whispered, she smiled. When someone snickered, she walked past like wind over glass. The silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Inside, though, her heart was an earthquake disguised as calm. She could feel the tremor of every whisper, the weight of every stare. But she'd learned something long ago, back when the world had chewed up her name and spit it out for entertainment. If you let cruelty see your fear, it wins. If you let it see your peace, it starves. So she smiled. Every smile was a blade. Every step was an act of rebellion. Jason didn't know it yet, but with every cruel joke, he was handing her power, because every attempt that failed made him smaller. By the end of the week, his frustration had become obsession. He watched her from across the cafeteria, watched how she laughed quietly with the librarian, how she helped a freshman pick up fallen books. She didn't even look at him, not once. And that burned worse than any insult. He threw another crumpled piece of paper into the trash and muttered, "She thinks she's untouchable." But one of his friends, a boy named Colton, hesitated. "Maybe just let it go, man. She's not biting." Jason glared. "That's the point. Everyone bites. Everyone breaks. I just have to find her edge." Lena spent that Friday night at her desk, the moonlight painting silver lines across her notebook. The world outside was asleep, but her mind wasn't. She wrote slowly, deliberately, her pen scratching against paper like the sound of armor being forged. "You can't defeat what refuses to fight you." Her mother's words echoed in her head. "Strength isn't always loud, sweetheart. Sometimes it's the silence that makes them listen." She paused, staring at the sentence she'd written. Her reflection looked back from the dark window, eyes steady, lips set. For the first time in a long time, she felt proud of her stillness. She closed the journal, whispering to herself, "Peace isn't surrender. It's power they don't understand. Peace can be more powerful than revenge, because peace terrifies the guilty." Monday arrived again, and with it, a shift in the air. Students were whispering again, but this time, not just about her. They were whispering about him. Jason Cole, the boy who couldn't make a girl flinch, the bully whose jokes weren't landing anymore, the king who was losing his crowd. The more he pushed, the more desperate he looked. And desperation, Lena knew, was the first crack in every kingdom. He upped the game. During homeroom, he dropped a fake rumor that she'd been expelled from her old school for stealing. During lunch, one of his friends tripped her in the line. Her tray clattered to the floor, food splattering across her shoes. The cafeteria went silent. Jason waited, heart pounding with expectation, for the explosion, the tears, the scene. But Lena just looked down at the mess, crouched, picked up her plate, and said quietly, "Accidents happen." She cleaned it up herself. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Someone muttered, "That's cold." Jason's friends shifted, suddenly unsure. Even they could feel it now. This wasn't normal. This wasn't defeat. It was composure, sharp enough to cut. By last period, even the teachers had started noticing the tension. One of them pulled Lena aside after class. "Miss Brooks," the teacher said kindly, "if someone's been bothering you?" "I'm fine," Lena replied, smiling softly. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Because fine didn't mean untouched. It meant unbroken. She wasn't trying to win a fight. She was teaching everyone watching that she didn't need to fight to win. After school, she found her locker vandalized again. This time worse. Permanent marker in jagged handwriting spelled fraud, liar, fake. A crowd gathered quietly behind her, waiting for a reaction. Lena studied the words for a long moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle of nail polish remover and a rag. Without a word, she began to clean. The black ink bled under her fingers, fading, disappearing. She didn't look at the onlookers. She didn't speak. She just wiped until the metal gleamed again. When she was done, she closed the locker, pressed her fingertips to the cool surface, and smiled faintly. Then she turned and saw Jason watching from the end of the hallway. Their eyes locked. His expression wasn't mocking this time. It was confused, maybe even a little haunted, because he realized something he'd never seen before. She wasn't ignoring him. She was dismantling him without ever lifting a hand. That night, she walked home under a deep orange sunset, her thoughts steady. The whispers had changed their rhythm. Where once they had stung, now they followed her like a strange kind of respect. Curious, cautious, unsure. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was mystery. And mystery, she knew, was power. When she got home, her mother was already at the piano, playing softly. Something slow, something aching. Lena leaned against the doorway, listening. "You lasted longer than most," Isabel said without turning. Lena smiled faintly. "He's trying hard." "He's losing harder," Isabel murmured. Lena walked over, sitting beside her on the bench. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" she asked quietly. Her mother stopped playing, fingers hovering over the keys. "Every day," she admitted. "But peace doesn't mean you stop fighting. It just means you choose your battlefield." Lena tilted her head. "And what if the battlefield is school hallways and whispering voices?" "Then you show them how a storm can be silent," Isabel said. Lena smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't soft but sharp, the kind forged by survival. That night, she opened her journal again, writing beneath her last sentence, "Let them whisper. The truth doesn't need to shout." She closed it, turned off the light, and lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring more games. She knew that. But now, she had something Jason didn't. Patience. Because patience wasn't weakness. It was the art of letting your enemy destroy himself while you stay untouched. Peace can be more powerful than revenge because peace terrifies the guilty. If you were in Lena's shoes, would you let peace be your weapon, or would you strike back and risk losing it? The Texas sun had started its slow descent, bleeding orange light across the cracked asphalt outside Brookdale High. The smell of sweat, dust, and triumph drifted from the gym as the basketball team spilled out after practice, laughing, shouting, throwing towels and pride in equal measure. Jason Cole led the pack. His sneakers squeaked against the concrete as he tossed his ball from hand to hand, basking in the sound of his own laughter. Victory came easy to him. On the court, in the halls, in life. But lately, something had been off. The laughter around him no longer felt as loud. His jokes no longer landed the same. There was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. Quiet, unsettling. And it had a name. Lena Brooks. The new girl he couldn't shake. The girl who refused to play his game. The one whose silence haunted him in the middle of his victories. Every time he saw her walking past his locker, something inside him coiled tighter like a fuse that couldn't decide whether to burn out or explode. So when the deep growl of an engine rumbled across the parking lot that evening, Jason didn't pay much attention, until every conversation around him stuttered to a stop. The car that rolled in didn't belong in a high school parking lot. It was a black SUV, polished like obsidian, windows tinted darker than night. The kind of vehicle that screamed money, but not the local kind, the Hollywood kind. Jason squinted as it slowed near the curb, sunlight sliding across its hood like liquid gold. Two men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area with the detached alertness of bodyguards. The team went quiet. Even Jason felt his grin falter. Then the rear door opened, and the world tilted. A woman stepped out, tall and graceful, wrapped in a cream coat that caught the wind. Her hair was swept back, sunglasses shielding eyes that once stared out from every magazine cover in America. Jason's breath caught. He knew that face. Everyone did. Isabel Hart. The actress who'd vanished from Hollywood after a scandal that burned brighter than her fame. The woman whose disappearance had sparked documentaries, hashtags, and whispers of tragedy. For years, she'd been a mystery, gone without a trace. Until now. The players began to murmur, their voices low, awed, disbelieving. No way. That's Isabel Hart. What's she doing here? Jason's stomach twisted. His mind raced for an explanation, but none came, until he noticed a student walking towards the car. A figure. Small. Familiar. Lena. She wore jeans and a plain white t-shirt, her hair pulled back, her usual quiet poise somehow even sharper under the fading light. For a second, Jason thought his eyes were lying. But then, Lena smiled, the kind of smile that only belonged to someone completely unafraid. And then she ran straight into Isabel Hart's arms. Jason's throat went dry. The noise around him vanished. All that existed was that moment. Lena, the invisible girl he'd mocked and cornered, standing beside one of the most famous women on the planet. It hit him like a slap. He hadn't been tormenting a nobody. He'd been humiliating a name the world once worshipped. He'd been bullying royalty. The ball slipped from his hands and rolled across the pavement, unnoticed. He took a step forward, as if distance might somehow rewrite what he was seeing. But Lena turned, as if she could feel his eyes on her. Their gazes locked. No anger, no smugness, just calm. A look that said, "I warned you." She didn't need to speak. Her truth filled the silence louder than any shout could. Isabel said something to her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from Lena's face. Her movements were slow, tender, protective. Then, noticing the stairs, she guided Lena gently toward the car. One of the guards opened the door again. Before getting in, Lena glanced once more toward the parking lot, toward him. Her expression was unreadable. But in that single heartbeat, Jason saw everything he'd refused to see before. Grace, pain, power. She wasn't scared of him. She never had been. She'd simply been choosing not to fight. And that realization, her quiet control, her impossible composure, shook him more than any confrontation could have. The SUV door closed. The engine purred. The car pulled away with smooth, effortless confidence, leaving only dust and stunned silence behind. For a long moment, Jason couldn't move. His friends tried to fill the air with noise, half-hearted jokes, awkward laughter, but even they sounded uncertain. "Bro," one muttered. "You've been messing with that?" Jason didn't answer. He just stared at the spot where the SUV had been, his jaw tight, his pulse loud in his ears. He wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it didn't matter, that it changed nothing. But the image of Lena hugging Isabel Hart kept replaying, burning itself into his mind. The girl he thought was powerless had connections that reached beyond anything he could imagine. And yet, she'd never once used them. That fact gnawed at him. Why hadn't she said anything? Why had she let him keep pushing, keep humiliating himself? Unless that was the point. Unless the quiet girl had been letting him dig his own grave. That night, Jason lay awake, the ceiling spinning above him. He scrolled through old photos on his phone, Isabel Hart on red carpets, smiling beside a man in designer suits, articles about her fall from grace. Every image felt like a spotlight aimed at his guilt. He threw the phone aside and sat up, breathing hard. He couldn't explain the feeling gnawing at him. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was fear. Because for the first time, Jason Cole wasn't the hunter. He was the fool who'd chased the wrong prey. Elsewhere, miles away, Lena sat in the back seat of the black SUV, her head resting against the cool glass. The city lights blurred by in streaks of gold. Isabel glanced at her. "Rough day?" Lena smiled faintly. "You could say that." Her mother's eyes softened. "They found out?" "Not everyone," Lena replied. "Just him." "Good." Isabel's voice was calm, proud. Sometimes the universe handles what we don't need to. Lena turned her gaze back to the road, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. Sometimes arrogance just needs an audience. They drove on, the night swallowing their laughter, soft, tired, victorious. The next morning, the whispers would explode. Names would circulate, stories would twist, and Jason would realize that power, once lost, never returns quietly. But for now, all that lingered in the parking lot was the echo of an engine, the faint scent of perfume, and a truth that hung heavy in the warm Texas air. The storm he'd awakened had a name, and she no longer needed to hide behind silence. Sometimes life lets arrogance meet destiny face to face. If you were Jason, what would you do when the person you tried to humiliate turns out to be someone the world once bowed to? Morning sunlight spilled through the cafeteria windows, warm and golden, but it couldn't thaw the chill that had settled over Brookdale High. For once, it wasn't Lena Brooks everyone was talking about. It was Jason Cole. The same boy who once ruled these hallways with arrogance and charm was now walking through whispers sharp enough to cut. "Did you see him yesterday?" He was pale, like he'd seen a ghost. His dad's business can't even compare to her mom's net worth. The words were quiet, but not quiet enough. Jason walked faster, tray in hand, pretending not to hear. The laughter that used to follow him had changed pitch, softer, mocking, dangerous. He'd been the predator once. Now he was bleeding in the water. He dropped into his usual table, surrounded by his friends, but the air between them was thin, fragile. No one met his eyes. "So, what?" he muttered, forcing a grin. "You all believe that garbage? She's just some washed-up celebrity's kid, big deal." No one answered. Colton cleared his throat. "Man, that wasn't just any celebrity. That was Isabel Hart." Jason's jaw tightened. "She's irrelevant now." But even as he said it, he saw the lie floating between them. Because Isabel Hart wasn't irrelevant. She was legend. And her daughter had just dethroned him without saying a single cruel word. He tried to laugh, tried to act like the same old Jason, but when he caught his reflection in the cafeteria window, the sight made him flinch. The boy, staring back, didn't look untouchable. He looked tired. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he scanned the lunchroom, and then he saw her, Lena, sitting alone at her table, the same as before. Except now the light hit her differently. Before, she'd been invisible. Now, she glowed. Her quiet had become her crown. And every pair of eyes that once turned toward Jason now shifted subtly toward her, curious, admiring, protective. He couldn't stand it. He pushed up from his seat, ignoring the murmurs behind him. His sneakers squeaked across the linoleum as he crossed the cafeteria floor. "Hey, princess!" he called out, voice loud, too loud. Heads turned. "Forget your bodyguards today?" Laughter, forced, uneasy, rippled through the crowd. The kind of laughter that said we don't want to be involved, but we can't look away. Lena turned slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her calm was unnerving. Her eyes lifted to his with the kind of composure people earn from surviving storms no one else saw. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even frown. She just said softly, "You really like performing, Jason." A pause, long enough for tension to thicken in the air. Then she added, her tone barely above a whisper but sharp enough to pierce, "Too bad the audience is changing." Silence. A few chuckles, nervous, uncertain, spread through the tables. Jason's grin faltered, his mask cracking for all to see. He opened his mouth to fire back, but no words came. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew. She was right. The crowd was changing. The same people who used to cheer for his cruelty were watching him now with something close to disgust. The power he'd once carried effortlessly was gone, replaced by the weight of his own reflection. He'd become the joke, and the only one laughing was fate. Lena turned away, calmly returning to her meal as if he'd never existed. Her serenity was maddening. He'd seen tears, screams, breakdowns, but never silence like this. Because silence meant control, and Jason Cole had built his entire identity on control. Now, it was slipping. He could feel it in every heartbeat, every whisper that followed him like a ghost. The walls that once echoed his name now felt smaller, tighter, like the world was shrinking to show him what he'd made others feel for years, In the hallway afterward, he caught sight of his reflection again, this time in a trophy case lined with the achievements of others. MVP plaques, championship ribbons, his name engraved in gold at the top. He stared at it, at the smiling boy immortalized in polished glass, and felt nothing but exhaustion. That smile wasn't real anymore. It wasn't victory. It was fear painted to look like confidence. Because that was the secret no one ever told bullies. They didn't crave cruelty. They craved relevance. And once they lost the crowd, they lost themselves. Later, during gym, he found her again. Lena stood by the bleachers, organizing her bag, sunlight catching her hair. He hesitated, torn between pride and something dangerously close to regret. "Hey," he muttered. She didn't look up. "Jason." Her calm tone twisted in his chest. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I wasn't competing," she said simply. That made him laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. "Right. Because people like you never have to. You've got everything handed to you." Lena turned then, finally meeting his eyes. Her gaze wasn't angry, it was honest, and that honesty burned. "You think my life was easy?" she said softly. "You think fame makes pain smaller? You have no idea what it's like to grow up with the world watching you fall, to have strangers decide who you are before you even know yourself." Jason blinked, thrown off by the weight in her voice. She stepped closer, her words steady as glass. "You mock people to feel powerful, Jason. But real power doesn't humiliate. It heals." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the air seemed to listen. Then Lena slung her backpack over her shoulder, brushed past him, and said without turning, "Bullies only win until someone stops being afraid." Jason stood there long after she'd gone, her words echoing like footsteps through his chest. For the first time, he felt what every target of his cruelty had felt under his reign: small. And that smallness didn't just sting, it terrified him. Because the moment the laughter stopped, the silence showed him who he really was, and he hated what he saw. That night, Lena sat by her window, the glow of her desk lamp soft against her face. She opened her journal and wrote, slowly, deliberately, "Bullies don't fear strength, they fear reflection." She paused, letting the words settle. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the horizon, a reminder that peace could be loud too when it wanted to be. She smiled faintly and added, "When the mirror turns, the cruelty ends." She closed her journal and whispered to herself, "He's starting to see it now." And across town, Jason stared at his ceiling, headphones in but no music playing, his chest heavy. He didn't know what he felt anymore. Anger, shame, regret, maybe all of them at once. He thought of her eyes, that calm, unshaken gaze. He thought of how he used to laugh at fear, and now it lived inside him. He finally understood what Lena had meant. Power wasn't about control, it was about peace. And peace, he realized too late, is what he had mocked all along. Bullies fear only one thing, the mirror held up to their own cruelty. If you were Jason, could you face your own reflection after realizing the pain you caused? The week that followed felt like calm after a storm. Too still, too quiet. The kind of peace that only existed right before something burned. Brookdale High seemed normal again. Jason Cole strutted the hallways as though nothing had happened, his grin returning like armor. The teachers smiled, the students laughed, and for a moment, the old rhythm returned. But beneath that surface calm, something had shifted. Lena could feel it in the air. A pressure, invisible but growing. The world had a way of returning what you gave it, and Jason had spent years throwing cruelty like sparks. The smoke was finally rising. On Thursday, whispers started spreading again. Not about Lena this time, not even about Isabel Hart. They were about the posts. Screens around the school began flickering during lunch, phones lighting up with anonymous notifications from an account no one had seen before. A truth at Brookdale. The first post was simple, Jason's name and a screenshot. Then came another, and another. Group chat logs, voice recordings, photos, proof. Every insult he'd ever thrown in private, every cruel joke, every message mocking classmates he called friends every time he'd bragged about making someone cry. The feed filled with evidence faster than people could refresh it. The cafeteria turned silent. Jason's laughter, the sound that had once dominated this place, was gone. He stormed through the hallways, fury boiling beneath his skin. His hands trembled as he shoved open classroom doors, demanding explanations no one could give. "Who did this?" he barked, slamming his phone onto a desk. Students scattered, avoiding his gaze like it burned. By Friday, half the school had seen the screenshots. The other half had heard the recordings. The king of Brookdale was crumbling in real time. That afternoon, Lena sat at her locker, quietly finishing her notes as the chaos buzzed around her. She didn't look up when Jason approached. She'd felt his anger from down the hall, loud, frantic, unsteady. He stopped beside her, voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "You trying to ruin me?" he spat. Lena closed her notebook carefully, the sound of paper against paper the only noise between them. Then she stood, meeting his eyes, calm, steady, unafraid. "I don't ruin people, Jason," she said softly. "They do that themselves." Her words landed like a stone dropped into water, quiet, but the ripples were unstoppable. Jason's jaw tightened. He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway out. "You think you're clever, huh? You and your famous mommy think you can just show up and—" "I think," Lena interrupted gently, "that you should stop before you say something you'll regret." For a second, the mask slipped. His pupils shrank, his breathing hitched, because in her voice there was no malice, no threat, only certainty. She wasn't warning him out of spite. She was predicting him. The following week, the chaos had grown claws. Jason's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from his friends, his teammates, his father. The school board had been notified. The principal had scheduled a meeting. He couldn't even look people in the eyes without seeing pity or disgust staring back. And the worst part? He didn't know who was behind it. Every face he passed looked suspicious. Every whisper sounded like laughter. He caught his reflection in a display case again. Eyes hollow, smile gone. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize himself. At lunch, he found Lena again. She sat beneath a tree outside, sunlight filtering through branches onto the open page of her journal. He stood there for a long time before speaking. "Everyone's turning on me." Lena didn't look up. "Maybe they're just seeing clearly now." "You don't understand." His voice cracked, frustration spilling over. "You think I wanted this? You think You liked control," she said quietly, "until you lost it." Jason's fists clenched at his sides. "You think you're better than me?" Lena closed her journal, finally meeting his gaze. "No, Jason. I think I chose different pain." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know what it's like to have the world watch you fall," she said softly. "But I also know you get to decide how you rise." For a moment, neither spoke. The breeze stirred the leaves above them, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and the tension of two people standing on opposite sides of a lesson. Jason swallowed hard. "You think I deserve this?" Lena hesitated, then shook her head. "I think you deserve the chance to change, but not until you stop pretending you've done nothing wrong." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was kind. Too kind for someone who'd endured what he'd done. That kindness hit harder than anger ever could. By the end of that week, the truth had devoured him whole. The posts hadn't stopped. More kept appearing, evidence of things Jason didn't even remember doing. The world he'd built on intimidation was collapsing, brick by brick. Even his friends had started to distance themselves. Colton wouldn't answer his calls. The coach suspended him until things settle. And his father, well, the phone call from him that morning had been colder than anything Lena had ever said. "You embarrassed this family, Jason. Fix it." But how do you fix something when everyone finally sees what you really are? One afternoon, Jason found himself walking the empty corridor behind the gym, the one he used to drag kids into for pranks. Now it was quiet, echoing, a ghost of its former self. He kicked at a locker, the sound clanging down the hall, but it didn't make him feel better. Nothing did. When Lena appeared at the far end, walking toward him, he froze. She didn't speak, didn't smirk, just stopped in front of him, arms folded lightly. "You look tired," she said gently. "I haven't slept," he admitted, voice hoarse. "Everyone hates me." "No," she said softly. "They're just done fearing you." Her words landed like truth always does, quiet, undeniable, and mercilessly freeing. Jason's eyes dropped to the floor. "Did you leak it?" Lena shook her head. "No, but I'm not surprised it happened." He looked up, confused. "When you light fires to hurt others," she said, her voice calm and steady, "don't be surprised when the smoke finds your own lungs." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Lena turned to leave, pausing just long enough to glance over her shoulder. "I told you once, Jason, you should be careful with your own reflection." And with that, she walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoing like a countdown he could no longer stop. That night, Lena wrote in her journal beneath the last entry, "The world doesn't punish cruelty, it reveals it." She stared at the words for a while, then added, "Redemption starts where denial ends." She closed the notebook, her hands steady. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall, only the quiet ache of knowing that pain was the only teacher he'd ever listened to. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally begun to hear. When you light fires to hurt others, don't be surprised when the smoke finds your own lungs. If you were Jason, would you fight to clear your name or learn to change before the smoke chokes you completely? For days, the halls of Brookdale High pulsed with unease, like a heartbeat waiting to stop. No one laughed too loudly anymore. No one whispered without checking over their shoulder. And Jason Cole, once the name that made people lower their eyes, now walked alone through a silence that weighed heavier than any crowd. His smile had become a habit, not an emotion, a thin mask stretched over something trembling. Every screen, every phone, every whisper felt like a ticking clock counting down to something he couldn't see. He didn't know what was coming, but everyone else could feel it. The fall was near. It happened on a Wednesday. The sky outside was gray and low, pressing the world into a hush. Students filled the cafeteria, their voices dull murmurs. The televisions mounted above the lunch line flickered, static first, then light. At first, no one noticed. Then the volume clicked on by itself. A video began to play. The room froze. Jason looked up just as his own face filled the screen. Laughter, sneering, a replay of his jokes. The footage shifted, quick cuts, like a confession spliced together from a nightmare. Him bumping into Lena, coffee splashing across her shirt. Him laughing as others whispered, him mocking students whose names he didn't even remember. Him standing tall while someone smaller crumbled. Each clip burned brighter than the last, like the truth had finally found its stage. Jason's stomach twisted. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. What the hell? But the video didn't stop. A title flashed across the screen. Power built on fear never lasts. Gasps rippled through the cafeteria. Phones lifted, screens glowed. Every eye turned, first to the televisions, then to him. Jason stood in the middle of it all, frozen. His breath came shallow and sharp. He tried to form words, but the truth was louder than anything he could say. The footage ended on one final clip, a blurry phone video, his hand gripping a smaller boy's backpack, the boy's voice cracking, "Please, stop." Then Jason laughing, cruel, careless, triumphant. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the whispers began. Was that real? That was him. Oh my God, he actually... Jason's chest tightened, his throat burned. He could feel their stares, the disgust, the disbelief, the betrayal. He turned and saw Lena. She sat at her usual table, still, quiet, her gaze unreadable. No triumph, no mockery. Just calm. The same calm that had unmade him from the start. Their eyes met, and he knew she hadn't leaked it. He could see it in her expression. This wasn't her victory. It was something bigger, something unstoppable. "Who did this?" he snapped, voice breaking through the murmurs. "Who's behind this?" But even as he said it, another realization hit him like ice water. Someone had recorded those moments. Someone had been watching all along. Later that day, after the teachers shut down the feed and called for order, the truth came crawling through the halls like smoke, unstoppable, uncontainable. The footage hadn't come from Lena. It had come from Evan Lee, a quiet sophomore with glasses too big for his face, one of Jason's oldest victims. He had finally showed himself, telling Jason himself, who couldn't do anything because he knew he's been defeated. There's no one to fight with him. 2 years ago, Jason and his crew had cornered Evan behind the gym, mocking his stutter, throwing his sketchbook into the mud. Evan had never spoken up, not once. But that day, watching Lena stand unshaken in the face of Jason's cruelty, something inside him had shifted. He saw that she didn't need to fight to win. She didn't need to scream to be heard. And for the first time, Evan realized that Jason wasn't untouchable, that the king could bleed. So he started collecting screenshots, recordings, proof. He'd been careful, quiet, invisible, like Lena taught everyone to be. But invisibility could also be power when used the right way. And when the world was ready to see the truth, he gave it to them. No fear, no regret, just justice. By the end of the day, Jason's phone was exploding with notifications he didn't want to read. The principal called him in. His coach wouldn't meet his eyes. His friends avoided him like he was contagious. When he walked through the hallways, people didn't move aside anymore. They just watched. The walls that once echoed his name now whispered it like a warning. He found Lena sitting on the front steps after class, watching the clouds drift low and heavy. She didn't flinch when he approached. She didn't even look up when he said, "It wasn't you." "No," she said softly. "It wasn't." "You know who it was?" She nodded slightly. Someone who finally stopped being afraid. Jason swallowed hard. Evan. Lena's gaze flickered toward him, calm as moonlight. "He learned something from you too, you know." Jason frowned. "From me?" She nodded. "You taught him what fear looks like, and I think I just showed him it could end." Jason sank down on the step beside her, head in his hands. "I never meant..." He started, then stopped, because he didn't even believe it himself. "I just liked feeling in control." "That's how it starts," she said gently. "You think control makes you powerful, but it just makes you afraid of losing it." He laughed bitterly. "Guess I lost it." "No," she said. "You were given a mirror. What you do with it is up to you." Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, and that kindness hurt worse than hate ever could. Jason looked up, eyes burning. "Everyone hates me now." "Maybe," Lena said softly. "But hate can't rebuild what fear destroyed. Only humility can." When he got home that night, Jason stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. He barely recognized the reflection staring back. Not the grinning king of Brookdale, but a boy stripped bare of power and pretense. He thought of Evan, of Lena, of Isabel Hart's voice echoing across the cafeteria. Power built on fear never lasts. He pressed his palms to the counter, his voice breaking as he whispered to no one. I don't want to be that person anymore. Outside, thunder rolled through the darkening sky. Not angry, just cleansing. The next morning, Evan walked into school to find a note taped to his locker. No threats, no excuses, just 4 words, written in Jason's careful handwriting. Thank you for truth. Evan smiled, small, quiet, real. And somewhere down the hall, Lena closed her locker, hearing the faint echo of something she hadn't heard in months. Peace. That afternoon, she wrote in her journal, the loudest redemption is silence after cruelty. Sometimes strength inspires others not to fight, but to rise. She smiled faintly, watching the ink dry across the page. Because the king hadn't just fallen. He'd learned to kneel, not to her, not to anyone, but to his own humanity. When the spotlight turns, those who lived by humiliation often meet their own. If you were Evan, would you risk everything to speak the truth even if your voice shook? Brookdale High moved differently now, quieter, not peaceful, just hushed, like a place that had finally seen itself in the mirror. The laughter that used to boom across the halls was gone, replaced by cautious whispers and half-avoided glances. Even the lockers seemed to close softer, as if the whole building were afraid to make too much noise. Jason Cole hadn't been to school for 2 days. Rumor said his father had pulled him out. Others swore he'd transferred. But truth rarely follows rumor. It waits. And on the 3rd morning, Truth walked back through the front doors. He came alone. No entourage, no swagger. His once perfect hair hung loose over eyes that had lost their shine. He looked smaller somehow, not shorter but quieter. Every conversation died as he passed. Whispers chased him like ghosts. That's him. Did you see the video? He doesn't even look the same. Jason kept his head down, pretending not to hear. Each step felt heavier than the last. Every echo reminded him of laughter he'd once owned, laughter that now turned sharp in his memory. He'd been a king here once. Now he was just the echo of one. At lunch, Lena sat by the window, sunlight painting golden edges into her hair. She'd chosen the same table she'd always sat at, still, calm, unreachable. The noise in the cafeteria folded around her like she didn't belong to it, like peace had built her a small, invisible fortress. When Jason walked in, the air shifted. He froze for half a heartbeat, unsure whether to keep going. Then he exhaled and forced his feet forward. Students stared. Phones lowered. He passed her table without speaking. And then, her voice, soft but clear. Guess the cameras didn't stay off after all. Her words weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They were simply true. He paused mid-step. She didn't look away. She held his gaze, her expression calm, almost kind. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only quiet understanding. Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came. The silence between them filled with everything he wanted to say, but didn't know how. So he nodded, small, almost invisible, and kept walking. The sunlight followed her. His shadow followed him, and between them lay the unspoken. Justice didn't need applause. By the end of the day, most people had moved on to new gossip. Teenagers are merciless like that. They crave chaos until something shinier comes along. But for those who'd watched, who'd whispered, who'd once laughed along with Jason's cruelty, the memory of that video still stung. It wasn't just his fall they remembered. It was their silence. And that, perhaps, was the truest victory of all. That evening, the sun melted into the horizon, setting Brookdale in shades of rose and amber. Lena sat on the porch steps, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, notebook resting on her knees. The air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. Behind her, the door creaked open softly. "Thought I'd find you out here," Isabel said, stepping into the fading light. Lena smiled faintly. "I like the quiet after everyone's done pretending." Her mother took a seat beside her, the boards groaning gently beneath their weight. For a long moment they didn't speak. Crickets hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Finally, Isabel broke the silence. "You didn't expose him, did you?" Lena shook her head. "No." Her voice was light, but her gaze was steady, strong. "I just stopped hiding." Isabel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's the bravest thing you've ever done." Lena smiled, a real one this time, soft around the edges. "It didn't feel brave. It just felt necessary." "Most brave things do," her mother said gently. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the quiet rhythm of a home that had known both fame and exile. Isabel reached over and took her daughter's hand. "When I left Hollywood," she began, voice low, "I thought disappearing was the only way to stay whole. But you showed me something different." Lena tilted her head. "What's that?" "That silence doesn't mean surrender. It means choice." The words settled between them, weightless yet solid. Later that night, Lena sat at her desk, window cracked open to the cool air. She flipped to a blank page in her journal and began to write. Peace isn't running away from the noise. It's learning to exist above it. Her pen hesitated, then continued. "Today, I saw what winning really means. It's not standing on the ruins. It's walking away with nothing left to prove." She closed the book gently and stared out into the dark. Somewhere out there, Jason was probably staring at his own reflection, realizing what she had learned long ago. That you can't hide from the truth, but you can rebuild in it. Meanwhile, across town, Jason sat on his bed, the glow of his phone illuminating tired eyes. He scrolled through messages, some angry, some cruel, some kind, and stopped on one from an unknown number. It was a photo of a basketball court empty with a single caption beneath it. "Start again." He didn't know who sent it. Maybe Evan, maybe Lena, maybe fate. But for the first time in weeks, he exhaled without fear. He set the phone aside and whispered to the dark, "I will." The next morning, when he walked through the front gates again, no one moved aside. No one cheered. No one whispered. But no one laughed either. And somehow, that was enough. He caught sight of Lena in the courtyard, reading under the same oak tree. He wanted to thank her, but words still felt too heavy. So instead, he nodded once from a distance. She didn't nod back. She just smiled, quietly, knowingly, and returned to her book. By sunset, Brookdale felt lighter. The cruelty that once ruled its halls had burned away, leaving something fragile but real behind. Awareness. Not everyone changed, but everyone remembered. And that was how peace began, not with applause, but with reflection. That night, Isabel stood at the kitchen window, watching Lena scribble in her notebook out on the porch, the soft glow of the lamp outlining her silhouette. A mother's smile tugged at her lips. She whispered to herself, "She didn't just stop hiding. She taught the world how to stand still." Lena closed her notebook one final time and whispered the last words of the day into the twilight. Silence was never weakness. It was strength waiting to be understood. The night air stirred softly, carrying her words into the dark like a promise. Sometimes winning means walking away without needing to be seen. If peace were a person, would it look like the one who forgave instead of the one who fought? Weeks passed, and Brookdale High was no longer the kingdom it once was. The walls that used to echo with laughter at someone else's pain now held something different. Awareness. Posters lined the hallways. Kindness counts. Stand up for each other. Silence isn't consent. Teachers smiled more. Students thought twice before speaking. Even the morning announcements had softened. They sounded almost human again. Jason Cole's name was still spoken, but in the past tense. He had become a story whispered between lockers, a cautionary echo of who not to become. The fall of the king had left space for something better to rise. Lena Brooks had not asked to fill that space. She simply showed up every day, quiet and steady, letting grace do what power never could. She walked the halls without fear now, her head high, but her eyes kind. People greeted her softly, some out of gratitude, some out of awe, and some out of the kind of respect that cannot be demanded. To everyone else, she was the girl who changed Brookdale. To Lena, she was just someone who had finally stopped running. Her fame, when it returned, was nothing like before. It wasn't cameras or red carpets. It was something deeper. She was noticed for her silence, the way it carried truth instead of anger. She was loved for her calm, the kind that steadied those around her. Even the school board, once too busy to care, had taken notice. One afternoon, the principal stopped her in the hallway and said, "Miss Brooks, you've given this school a second chance." Lena smiled, humble and genuine. "I just reminded it to listen." When the final week of term arrived, the corridors glittered with banners. Year-end celebration. Friday, auditorium. There would be laughter again, music again, but this time it would belong to everyone. Jason came too. He didn't hide anymore. He moved quietly among his classmates, not as the ruler of the hallways, but as one of them, ordinary, learning. When their eyes met across the crowd, Lena gave a small nod. He returned it. No words, no bitterness, just understanding. The auditorium filled with light that evening, strings of gold paper twisting from the ceiling. Students took their seats in excited waves, the hum of conversation rising like warm thunder. Near the stage, Isabel Hart watched from the back row, her heart full and still. Her daughter had asked her to come, but not to speak. "This is my story to finish," Lena had said. When Lena's name was called, the audience erupted, not in shrieks or applause of fame, but in applause of recognition. She climbed the steps slowly, the overhead lights washing her in white. She didn't look like a celebrity. She looked like someone who had learned peace the hard way. She stood behind the podium, a small card in her hand. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. When she looked up, the room fell quiet. Even Jason, sitting near the back, felt something in his chest shift. Lena began softly. "I used to think strength meant being loud," she said, "standing tall, shouting back, making people see you." Her eyes swept the crowd, faces she once feared, faces that now listened. "But real strength," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "isn't noise. It's not anger. It's the courage to stay calm when the world demands chaos." A murmur rippled through the room, not of boredom, but of thought. Even the teachers leaned forward. Lena smiled faintly. "It's measured not by how loud you are, but by how much truth you can carry without dropping your peace." Her words landed like rain after a drought. The room fell utterly still. No clapping yet, just silence. The kind of silence that listens. She closed her card, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Thank you for teaching me that silence isn't weakness. It's a choice." For a heartbeat, the auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Then the applause came, not wild, but deep. The kind that came from somewhere honest. Isabel wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Jason, near the back, clapped too, slowly, sincerely, his gaze lowered in humility. And for the first time since the story began, every sound in the room was free of cruelty. After the ceremony, the golden evening spilled across the school grounds. The music faded, the chatter softened. Students lingered under strings of lights, saying goodbyes that felt new, not bitter. Lena stepped outside into the glow, her shoes crunching softly on the gravel path. The sky above her burned in streaks of rose and amber, and the air carried the scent of rain waiting to fall. She paused at the edge of the steps and turned, looking one last time at the building that had once been her battlefield. Now it was quiet. Now it was hers. Jason appeared a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He looked uncertain, smaller than the boy who had once towered over everyone. "Hey," he said quietly. Lena turned. "Hey. I heard you're transferring next year. Private program?" She nodded. "Yeah, new beginnings." He hesitated. "You deserve that." For a moment, the world stilled between them. Then he said the words he should have said long ago. "I'm sorry." Lena studied him, really studied him, and saw no performance left, no arrogance, just truth. "I know," she said gently. "Make sure you mean it with your actions." Jason nodded once, grateful. "I will." They didn't shake hands. They didn't hug. But somehow, that simple exchange was enough. Down by the curb, Isabel waited beside the familiar black SUV, the evening light glinting off its polished surface. When Lena approached, her mother's smile was soft, proud, complete. "Ready?" Isabel asked. Lena glanced back one last time at Brookdale High, the building that had broken her, tested her, and taught her to rebuild from silence. "Yes," she said, "more than ever." As she opened the car door, Isabel squeezed her hand. "You changed more than a school, you know." Lena smiled faintly. "No, Mom. They just finally heard the quiet." The engine started. As they drove away, the campus faded in the rearview mirror, bathed in gold light. Lena leaned her head against the window, watching the horizon stretch open. She wasn't the new girl anymore. She wasn't the hidden celebrity. She was simply the girl they should have never underestimated, because she'd taught them all something they would never forget. That calm could be louder than chaos. That grace could be sharper than cruelty, and that peace, when chosen, could shake kingdoms. Never mistake quiet for weak. The calmest waters can drown empires. If you were Lena, would you choose to be loud enough to be heard, or calm enough to change the world?